Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thanks to our esteemed panel for joining us. So I'm Tony Jones from One Nucleus, and as part of our On Helix conference, we're recording a number of sessions from around the world. Today we have North America, Europe, and UK, all around the theme of what creates a great ecosystem. Some of the challenges over the COVID disruption and pandemic have meant we haven't been able to meet up with everybody we'd like. But actually, one of the upsides is we can do things like this without anyone having to travel anywhere, and we can get really interesting perspectives and learn from each other. And today's session, for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to focus on what makes a great ecosystem for an effective academia-industry interface. You hear it spoken a lot about in terms of politicians, industry and academia and influencers. We hear it used a lot in policy because everywhere claims that they've sort of resolved it and got it working ideally. I'm not sure anywhere I've been has ever felt it's perfect because they're different cultures. But we've got lots to talk about and lots of perspectives. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists here to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about where they're from and what they think is working well. So I'll start with Sarah.
Hello. First of all, thank you, Tony, for bringing together the panel today. My name is Sarah Niemann. I am the Manager for International Affairs at Life Science Nord, which is a cluster organization for medtech, biotech, and pharma companies located in northern Germany. So we represent the states of Hamburg and Schleswig-Holstein, which is basically everything up until the Danish border. Yeah, so we have approximately 500 companies, research institutions, university clinics, and so on within our ecosystem. And as a cluster organization, we are the connecting factor, I want to say. So whenever there's a question coming up, a need to get connected to somebody else, as a cluster organization, we are in charge of, connecting these people. And yeah, so we're very happy that we have a very open ecosystem where people are willing to get in touch and to interact, not just from the company side, but also research, academia, and also from the public side. So yeah, we're very fortunate in that.
Niall.
Fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity, Tony. So my name is Niall Kerrigan, and I am the Business Development Manager responsible for the Life Sciences sector portfolio at Calgary Economic Development in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So our organization is a full service concierge office who works with investors and the local business community to attract investment and build the economy in Calgary, Alberta in our key sector areas. And in 2018, the life sciences sector was identified as a key sector for sustainable growth, as there was a considerable amount of momentum and lots of industry activity and emerging companies coming out of our research institutions here in Calgary. So it was decided to make a dedicated effort to focus on growing this sector. And so my role specifically is to work both from the top down and bottom up approach. So working with the local community here, ensuring that there's a nurturing environment for our innovators and our companies here locally to succeed and stay in Calgary and contribute to the ecosystem that way. And also, promoting our value proposition of our ecosystem to investors beyond outside of Calgary's borders to come in and take advantage of what's going on in the vibrant ecosystem that we're growing here. So I'd say a few of the things that we've done exceptionally well in our short history as a growing life sciences cluster is really encouraging our innovators from our research institutions here locally in taking that leap into entrepreneurship and taking that jump to establish their early stage life sciences ventures and filling the journey in that early stage to make sure that they can get legs under them quickly and start to commercialize and derive value out of their innovations. So that's probably one thing that we've done exceptionally well over the last little while.
Thanks, Emily.
Hi, Tony, and thanks for the opportunity. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm an Associate Director of Licensing at Mass General Brigham Innovation. So Mass General Brigham is an integrated healthcare system based in Boston. And so it's composed by Harvard-affiliated hospitals, including, among others, Mass General Hospital, the Brigham and Women's Hospital, Mass Pioneer, McLean, and Spalding. And so these hospitals are huge academic medical centers with around 2 billion of annual academic and research funding. And so the work of our PIs is really shared between the bench and the bedside. So I do work for Mass General Brigham Innovation, and the Innovation Office mission is to transform early stage innovation into tangible business opportunities to provide solutions to our patients. And so the team, the licensing team at Mass General Brigham Innovation is about 30 business development people working on a very exciting and large IP portfolio from about 6,200 faculty members across our hospitals. And so this IP portfolio is very, again, varied in terms of therapeutic areas and technologies and modalities. So we have a lot of things to do. And so regarding the ecosystem, we are based in Boston, more precisely in Cambridge, the other Cambridge, Tony. And so we are lucky to be part of a vibrant life sciences ecosystem. I would say, again, not stating the obvious, but well, probably I will. The Cambridge ecosystem is really unique in the way that many like pharma companies, VCs, biotechs, academic institutions are just like side by side. And you walk on the street and you're just like surrounded by these companies and VCs and others. And so having those side by side, I think the innovation and the science is everywhere, even when you have like a lunch break at a cafe, which is more like a pre-COVID comment, although I hope that we can have that back in the next couple of months.
Excellent. And Brad, welcome to you.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me, and glad to speak with everyone who's watching and listening. So I live in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., in Montgomery County, which is the largest county in the state of Maryland, and a thriving bioscience hub and ecosystem. We have a lot of really unique assets here in Maryland. Where I'm located, we have Johns Hopkins University, the University of Maryland, surrounded by Georgetown and the universities in Virginia. But in addition to that, we have the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, the Food and Drug Administration. So we do have a lot of diverse and remarkable opportunities to look for technology in this area. So I look forward to speaking about it.
Excellent. Gino.
Hello, everybody. Not Italian. I'm Gino Martini. I'm English. But I consider myself an industrial pharmacist. I've worked in the industry for many years. I then spent some time in academia. I'm now the chief scientist for the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. And I think I started this journey about 10 years ago. I've been in industry, pharma industry, for 17 years. I never met anybody really like discovered the drug that took it from chemistry all the way into the patient. And yet I walked into academia, I met about 5 that done that. And that got me thinking, you know, why academics are they any smarter than industrial pharmacists or industrial chemists? The answer is not really, but the environment in which they're operating in has allowed them to, I think, explore, give them lateral thinking, and being able to do things that perhaps unhindered by bureaucracy. And that's why I've been really enchanted by this environment. What makes them so productive, and that's what I bring to the table. I think for this conversation today, I think there are really 4 ingredients. I think, Emily, you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but it's access to great ideas, access to talent, access to capital, and access to customers. If you can get them all located or within your environment, then I think you're going to succeed. But looking at some of the academics in the small world of pharmacy, which I dominated in the UK, there have been some great discoveries. Molecules have come to market by a PhD student working with their supervisor, and that's truly remarkable if you think about it in that way.
Thanks. Iris, we come to you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, everybody, and I'm happy to be here. As you say, my name is Irison, and I am an investment advisor for life science at Business Region Göteborg, and Business Region Gothenburg is the economic development office in West Sweden in the Gothenburg region. We are fully owned by the city, and we also are, so we are like 75 people, so we also are the enterprise and innovation office in the region. So that's So that's why we are also co-owners of all our science parks, not only life science, but also clean tech, IT, automotive, and so on. So we are managing different clusters, and I am acting as the first port of contact for all foreign companies that are interested in entering the city by partnering or starting operations in the region. And when I'm trying to think what has been the keys for our success, I think that because Sweden is a very small country with only 11 million people, we have in our DNA that we need to collaborate and we need to co-create. So I think that something that you will see in the life science sector, but also in many other sectors, is that we are trying always to working together, public, private systems, small companies, large companies, etc. So I think that co-creation and collaboration is our key for success, and it's a part of the Swedish history.
Thank you. And finally, Catherine.
Thank you. Catherine Gagnon, I work for Access, which is a new organization in the province of Quebec in Canada. We've actually started our activity just in April of this year, so we're only a few months old. The organization is a nonprofit organization which was created and is financed by the government of Quebec. And we have the mission to really provide our services to all public research institutions in the province of Quebec, which includes university, obviously, but also college, hospital, and any research institution, with the goal, obviously, to accelerate the development of high potential innovation, which is coming out of Quebec. So we are offering our services and consulting to all the actors of the province of Quebec. And we are offering service like, obviously, the development of the technologies, financing, IP management, and then innovation transfer to partner in the province of Quebec or anywhere around the world. Obviously, we also focus on helping startup creation and supporting scientific entrepreneurship. As many of you have already mentioned, I think we've covered life science, obviously, but we also have a much broader range, which includes science, engineering, clean tech, and so on. So there is a very strong, I would say, sense of emergency from the province of Quebec to really promote innovation, both internally within the industry of the province of Quebec, but also to bring the innovation to transfer throughout the world. So I think one great aspect that we have is this willingness of the provincial government to really support. So we have access to a grant program, which really is a large envelope, which really allows us to help these technologies. And this is a partnering grant, so there is a need for a partner to be involved, but the government provides funding at the level of 80% if it's a company within Quebec and 50% if it's a company outside of Quebec. And this is really helpful when identifying a partner, but maybe the technology is not quite what they're looking for. And we can use this grant program to really bring this technology where the partner wants it to be, and then make the transfer easier. So I think this is really where we want to accelerate the transfer of technology.
And I think a sense coming through really, it's great to have such a diverse set of environments really and drivers behind the group here, because lots of people will look at Cambridge, Massachusetts and think that's the role model that everybody wants to be. We're fortunate enough for One Nucleus, we're headquartered in Cambridge in the UK, and it also gets a lot of NB directed towards the ecosystem it has. I'm not sure I've worked in it for decades now, and I've never really worked out what that little magic dust is that people seem to think exists. It comes down to bright people and hard work primarily, I think. But one of the things just occurred to me as you were going through, it's about how the ecosystem, how scalable can the ecosystem be? Because I think, Emily, you touched upon this, the fact you keep bumping into people, and yet Cambridge, Massachusetts and Boston next door to it is kind of a huge ecosystem of innovation. Sweden's a much smaller country. So I don't know, maybe I could start, I'll come to you, Emily. Is bigger better, do you think? You're just on mute, I think.
Thank you. That's a good question. I think I also had the experience of working in London, in Cambridge, in this area where I think that a lot of innovation also arise from these ecosystems. I think it's not really the size of the ecosystem in the Boston area that they found really that it's really making things working, but it's really about the mindset here, about the mixing of the mindset between academia and industry, and the fact that there is this proximity between all of these institutions, like Harvard being in front of an hospital, being in front of an industry. I think there are lots of exchanges that occur. So it's not because there are so many companies. Obviously the opportunities are higher, but I think it's really based on the mindset that started to change back probably in the 60s, when things really started there. I think there are some opportunities and some initiatives that are making things again working to me, such as optimizing the fact that we can be within an academic institution, but also gain experience in the industry. And so, for instance, at Mass General Brigham Innovation, we have a program called Innovation Fellowship. And so it enables our faculty members to spend some time within industries. And the goal is really to gain on-site experience on drug development and commercialization. And so then the fellow can then go back to the academic institution, and you can think that he comes back with this enrichment of translation, making sure his research or her research can be more translational, and really with the end goal to provide solutions for the patient. So it's only one example, and I'm sure my peers here will share others, but long answer to your question, I think it's really about having an ecosystem full of different angles that communicate well. And there are conferences used to be conferences every night, and things where people will just mingle and network. So I leave it to my other peers and colleagues here.
Iris.
Yes, I think that you asked a very interesting question, something that we have been thinking about a lot. I think that some years ago, we were always, because we create clusters, okay, we were always thinking about that proximity and the physical place. It's important for creating a cluster, and because Sweden is very small and Gothenburg even smaller, when we talk, we don't say only Gothenburg, we say the Nordics, because it's bigger, because it's more visible. So if you ask us, as the public system, we will say the bigger, the better, okay? Because then we are more visible, and it's also important for our branding. But if you ask the companies or the people working more with business development, they could say that the content is key, the talent. It doesn't matter whether you are 500 people or whether you are 20. The important thing is that those ones that are in the cluster actually can co-create something with focus on the future. And that's not very easy, because then you need to start thinking about how you combine it, whether you will connect IT with the life science or the large company like AstraZeneca with the smaller ones, etc. So it depends on to who you ask that question. Yeah.
Sounds like it's not how big it is what you do with it, in the sense of the mix of people there and how it's optimized. But I guess that gets me on to a question I think I posed, which I'm going to sort of just go through this as a discussion. Maybe I'll come to Brad on this one first. So when you look at the industry-academia interface, and I've come from a background of technology transfer, and I immediately think about research and tech transfer and licensing and patents. But actually, taking academia or public sector and its wider thing, and you're sitting in a context with many government agencies there, not just the research base. So what's the goal of having the best interface between industry and public sector you can have? What would you say success looks like? What's it there for?
I come from the commercial side of the world. So success for me always looks like translation, right? It's that conversion of basic science to applied science, and then actually having some new development which will help to improve human health. And I think that's a challenge academics sometimes face, which it's not a challenge for them, it's a challenge in moving down that translational pipeline of, basic science may enable applied science, but it's not applied science. And so there's a frequent disconnect in scientists and academicians typically knowing what type of work they need to do that could result in some sort of translation to human health. And the other thing that I've found is, and Emily talked about this, it's not just the talent, it's sort of that mixture of talent and different skill sets that get applied. I happen to live in a place where there's almost unlimited access to intellectual property. But the challenge with that is every institution you deal with around the world, whether it's a government institution or an academic institution, there tend to be substantial barriers to getting things done at the speed of business. They tend to be very slow, very bureaucratic. From an outside perspective, they seem to be frequently disinterested in sort of getting things done at the pace you'd like to. And so for that, in almost every circumstance, what I found is you have to be able to take that layer of bureaucracy, which is responsible for the licensing and other types of deals, and somehow manage to engage with the researchers. And those researchers really have to want to be involved in some sort of commercial application or whatever type of work you're doing, because you need to have them to be an internal champion to help really push that bureaucracy from the inside to move that forward. And I see that almost everywhere, is that when someone's going to a technology transfer office and doesn't have that engagement of the academic researcher, it just seems to hit it's not a roadblock, but just starts to move at a pace that's almost unbelievably slow and impossible to move forward. So.
I see lots of nodding. Catherine, how do you find that perspective, and what does success look like for you if you kind of oil the wheels of that interface?
My background is also in the industry. I was 15 years in biotech, so I think Brad made a very good point that maybe the research team is very important when doing a good tech transfer, because some research team will, I would say, listen to the need of the industry and really work with them to address this need, where some researchers are very much into fundamental research and are not so much considering the need, more looking at their science specifically. So a good tech transfer includes a team that wants to do this tech transfer and so on. So in one way we have found to try to accelerate the process, because we've all been facing a deal negotiation that takes way too long and that have a partner lose interest is we're working in as two people are working together, one which is more the link with the research scientist, and the second person which has more business head and is more towards the business aspect. And in that direction, in that sense, we're trying to accelerate the process where the business focus person will really drive the process and so on. And the scientific driven person will be more managing the scientist and the program and make sure that it goes in the right direction. So I think this teamwork is a way to accelerate things and make things easier. But it all goes back to, does the research address what the industry needs? And this is always where it's challenging.
Yeah. Niall, you've got to want to come in there.
Sure, thanks, Tony. And completely agree with Brad's comments. The ultimate goal of an effective academia industry interface engine is to create a robust and repeatable model for translating intellectual property that our institutions are also exceptionally well resourced to create into return for the community. And speaking from a smaller emerging life sciences cluster that we're building here in Calgary, lots of parallels and likely lots of similarities to Iris's community in Sweden. There's a lot more considerations, I think, with regards to the long-term impact that and value generation from the IP that we're looking to translate from our institutions here. And so the actors along that chain need to be cognizant and mindful that the returns are also filling the other buckets that we're looking for in economic development. So building that robust talent pool locally here and creating those repeat entrepreneurs, I think, that we can recycle through our system here, rather than, the quickest route to revenue generation might be out licensing it to our neighbors south of the border here, which of course is good for good returns for the inventor and maybe sometimes the quickest way for revenue generation, but it's not always going to be the most beneficial to building a repeatable and robust ecosystem locally here. So I think having all of our actors along that chain aligned with what the goals are and what each one of them view and how to build up that repeatable ecosystem here, I think, is really important from an emerging cluster perspective.
Yeah, the ability to build scale, I think, is something we hear a lot, I think, and growth is desired. But Gina.
Yeah, so I want to make a couple of points if I may. So for supporting Iris, if you look at the innovation index over the last 10, 15 years, the Nordics, Sweden, normally always in the top 5, as is Israel, by the way, as well, which is what I always found quite interesting. And then go back to Emily mentioned about exchange of people. Fluidized boundaries is something I really encourage. We wanted people from academia to come to industry and industry to go to academia, and that was a really active policy about 6-7 years ago, and I think that was very successful. But then things changed as things do, and I think that's a big issue. But one thing we are doing in the UK that I think is really interesting, and I've got to be careful what I say because I sit on REF at the moment, it's called the Research Excellence Framework. And basically the government assesses universities in terms of their research outputs, okay? They did that in 2008, and it was only solely on how many papers in Nature, what we call 4-star research. In 2014, I was part of that team, and this time about 65% of the score went to research outputs. The rest was on impact and environment. And this is where we start seeing the transition from pure research to applied research. I'm now on REF 2021, and we've done the same thing again. We are now looking at research outputs for what's 3-star, 4-star, and of course what's impact and environment. And basically, the more scores you get, the more funding you'll get, and that's a revolution that's happened over since 2008. And I think that will drive a greater balance of pure research and applied research. So that's what I wanted to share with you all today.
I don't know what others think there. I'm just thinking as you were saying, and maybe Sarah, you see this in Germany. We then have to get aligned between industry interest and the academics interest to get there. So it has to be answering the right question. I think someone phrased it.
That's actually,
you compromise what you fund so that it aligns with industry.
It's actually an interesting point that Catherine raised earlier, that not always research and industry completely match one and another, and I completely agree with what my peers have said before me. It's like in every ecosystem there's different strength. So you have the research, you have great ideas which we tend to see come out of public research, like public research institutions quite a bit, and perhaps the others see similar things in their ecosystems. And then on the other hand, you have the industry that has tremendous experience and capabilities to bring them up to speed, to really make sure that the innovation comes to the patient's benefit. And so I think the better, I want to say, each capability or each entity speaks to each other, the better the outcome is going to be. Perhaps a practical example that came to my mind is, we had a project in the past called Bridge 53, which was focused on infectious diseases, and to make sure that we have different stakeholders talk to each other early. So basically make industry expertise accessible for basic research at a very early stage. And so we had different stakeholders sit together at a round table to make sure that everyone talks to each other, and that there's the capability to make sure that we don't wait until the research is done and everything is kind of basically set, but to have the dialogue start pretty much from the get-go. So we felt that was at least a very good starting point to intertwine these things.
Tony, if I can add, I think Neil made a very important point to me that I don't think we've covered yet, and I think this hits with Emily and you, Tony, about the Cambridges. Sort of success breeds success. Once you start to have a few entrepreneurs or a few researchers or a few out licensing offices or whatever it may be that have a success and move that forward and then come back for their next round of success, they sort of learn the pattern or the secret to success, and you start to see that snowball effect where one does it and then enables two to do it, and two do it enabling three to do it. And I think people always want to replicate either of the Cambridges wherever they are, but you can't do that overnight. I mean, they both have been around for hundreds of years, and this has been a long process. And then Emily talked about Cambridge back in the 60s. I remember Cambridge, Massachusetts back in the late 80s, and no one wanted to be there, right? It's been but that snowball has been incredible in that area. So I think that's really important, is how you look at the opportunities to generate small starting successes and then don't let them go. Just continue to think about how you can get the next one and next one, and let those people who succeed continue to do so.
Iris, yeah.
Yeah, so in 2019, just before COVID, we make a trip to Boston, visited Mass Bio, Moderna, etc., looking for the formula as a public system here. We wanted to know why it's Boston cluster so successful. And we learned a few things. Among of them, we cannot copy formula because, for example, in Sweden, the healthcare system is mainly public. So that means there is very little research at the university that is done without the involvement of the healthcare, because we have a university hospital. So without the healthcare, there is usually no so much conversation between the industry and the researchers. So we learned that, okay? And the other thing is, in Sweden, we have something called teaching exemption. That means that the researcher owns their IP. So they do whatever they want. You cannot force them to, make it into a product. So in that way, we need to think in another way, okay? So what is important, I think, it's this kind of forum when we can share best practices, listen, and then try to find these options that might suit our own cluster.
Yeah, it's being able to adapt, I guess, isn't it, into the toolbox you have, as opposed to maybe what Massachusetts has or Montgomery. But I think there's an interesting part for me within that. And again, it comes down to stakeholders. And I'm sort of reflecting on what's happened through the pandemic and how rapidly the researchers, clinicians, industry and regulators and government bodies all came together because there was this sense of emergency, which really there was. But I guess it's one of the few times I felt I'd seen all of the stakeholders engaging at the same time. And quite often we see the funding bodies of research engaging with maybe industry academics. Other times we'll see the healthcare provider engaging with government and academics, maybe with industry. But this has been one time where, so is there something to learn from this disruption of how we engage all the necessary stakeholders to align that? And, or do we think it will continue now that they've built those relationships? Gino, you're closest of most people I know to some of this. So
yeah, well, I think we've seen this word has been used a lot as unprecedented, but we have seen unprecedented level cooperation, haven't we, between industry, small startups, and government bodies and regulatory agencies at a level we've never seen before. And in some ways, I almost think it's a bit of a Pandora's box, because we can't go back, can we, to can we go back to longer regulatory review times, do you know what I mean, or no cooperation? I don't think we'll ever go back to that. I think we'll have to be a halfway house somewhere. But it has been an enormous level of collaboration I've ever seen before. Competitors working with competitors, yeah? Competitors, industry working with academia, working with government. And I think if we can keep that kind of momentum going, it'll be an innovation engine that'll keep driving. And I think that's the bit that I've seen. And it's a shame that a pandemic had to do that, but clearly it's happened. And a bit I think Brad mentioned before about risk, I think is really important, because I've always felt in the UK, for example, our risk appetite was actually much lower than, say, in the US, but we're getting better. We're tolerating risk a lot more, and therefore we're seeing a lot more investment in those organisations that probably might have been a lot more risky as well. But so the collaboration piece that we've seen at a government level, regulatory agency level, is just been remarkable, and long may continue.
I mean, if I think of the different ecosystems and that coming together and a dire need for urgency in terms of regulating, it's put so much energy into the system. Energy to the point where you've seen people literally seems working around the clock, because we all depend on the couple of solutions. But no, Sarah, I guess I'd be interested in your say, can ecosystems continue with that level of energy, or do people just burn out? Do they overheat?
That's a good question, actually, and that's what came to my mind just now, is that even though it has been now an unprecedented example of how fast things can run, obviously there's so many different challenges in healthcare, and not just COVID. And I don't think that we can work at the same level of urgency and the same level of intensity for each problem that is presented to us by surroundings. So I think it should teach us how fast it can go if really need be, but it should be in a sense that we can do it in a marathon, not in a sprint kind of sensation. I mentioned in the very beginning, we do represent two states in Germany, so it's a relatively small ecosystem. Just like Iris said, it's like looking at a kind of at a micro level. In our case, Germany being also a very public system, we have been very fortunate that our two local governments are extremely involved in our work that we do. So they are all stakeholders, and so there's a regular exchange in this micro level. They read on a regular level, they ask for our opinion or for our input, where funding should be put at, how we should support certain research endeavors or different things. So we feel that even pre-COVID, we had a very good thing going on, between governance policymakers and different institutions, but it hasn't intensified during the last couple of months or the basically past year and a half. And I think that's a good impulse, but we need to build sustainable structures that can run the test of time, I think. But hopefully this has given a very good push in the right direction.
But it's certainly shown what can be done. It was just that, can you maintain that pace? And I guess, Emily, you've been in what seems like a real hotbed and very heated ecosystem and energized even before COVID. So I can only imagine what it's been like while people have had the urgency of COVID to deal with.
Yes, it was intense. It was something for sure for all stakeholders. We were trying to play our role at best, meaning moving as fast as possible. As you mentioned, Tony, I think the human factor that we had during this period of time is not something we can replicate forever if we don't want to have all our teams in complete burnout. But I think we have definitely learned some good lessons. If I take the viewpoint of what we do and most of us do in terms of more the licensing part, I think during this COVID time, we learned to lower our contractual barriers to make sure that we can alleviate some misalignment that we usually have. And so it was quite interesting to see that, during that period of time, we had simple agreements such as CDAs and material testing agreements signed in hours and licensing agreements signed in days. We were talking earlier about some deal negotiations we have all been in that could last for months, if not years. And so I think, again, replicating that is not something we can always do. There will always be complex deals between academia and industry, and always misalignment that our goal again is to make sure we can lay down and align and find just a good way to move the project forward and the deal forward. But I think under certain scenarios, and that's something that we are working on at Innovation, is to ensure that we can adjust and adapt our contracts and our agreements in the way that we are able to just move forward a bit more quickly than the norm. So I think that's a good lesson learned as well from this pandemic, more on the contractual side.
Yeah, I guess, Iris, I've got a question for our two Canadian children. So you guys always seem very laid back and cool, calm and collected up there in Sweden. So how does this look when it's overheated?
I can give you an example of an opportunity and a challenge, okay? An opportunity is because innovation all the way from academia to the market within healthcare takes a lot of time, requires a lot of money. We have a new innovation fund in which we actually fund innovators from the healthcare, meaning the nurse, the doctor, the employee from the hospital with the idea, seeing the problem itself, we fund it, and then it's easier to implement because it's actually coming from the customer, okay? That's something that is going fantastic, very quick. You don't need to, test it in the same way because it's coming from the healthcare. So that's quick and very good. Now, a challenge. The healthcare, it's very fragmented, not only within SO Europe, but also in Sweden and within a region. So we have county councils in charge of some things and SO municipalities in charge of home care, home service. So when we try to expand the solutions into the healthcare, then there is a big problem with data, with the cloud, with IT, with the privacy. So then we are stuck. So you see, so even though from the academia and the industry, they say things have to go faster, there is a real problem with regulation and implementation because of the fragmented healthcare that we have within Europe, as compared with the USA, which is more.
But I guess it's that part of it isn't just regulation and approval, it's adoption that then becomes the actual rate limiting step. But Catherine, how do you see that from Quebec in terms of that engagement with the clinical entrepreneurs?
It's it's I have to agree with Iris where I mean the time from the innovation to market is very long, and there's issues with attracting the right fund to actually move these projects quicker. So if you add to that issues on with governments and delays and legal, then you're going from you're just expanding the timelines to a point where the IP that you originally took is, I mean, the time is ticking, and so the pandemic has shown that there's an interest in financing earlier, moving faster. But I think there's still a big step in terms of regulator where things will go to the next step, and we also are looking at social innovation where we also are working with staff in hospitals and different institutions to take their ideas and implement it in a social way that it will help their environment and their way of working. It's definitely something that we need to do. It's something that needs to be occurring all over the world, I would say, but it's hard. It's not always easy to transfer outside of, let's say, one hospital, say, oh, I have this great way of working. This is like, and it works well in their environment, but to take this innovation and put it somewhere else, it's always a challenge. And again, if it's something that is regulated by the health ministry, and we also in Quebec face the same issues where, there's a Canadian federal government, provincial, and then municipal, and different layers and different rules. So it becomes cumbersome to try to, maybe have these great practice, but switching it from one environment to another becomes a challenge. So the regulator will need to ease things maybe.
Which I guess is always a challenge with disruptive technology, because you change workflows and different places can adopt workflows differently. Now,
yeah, thanks, Tony. So I wanted to add maybe an additional kind of Canadian perspective to Catherine's comments as well. Healthcare in Canada, of course, is through a public payer system, and it's the responsibility at the provincial level. And each province kind of runs things differently. But uniquely in the province of Alberta, it's unique in Canada in that it's a fully integrated system under one health authority and one healthcare provider for the entire province, and across our large cities to our small towns to our rural environments. And so that level of integration, I think, has really given our jurisdiction a leg up when it came to implementing innovative solutions that were of such immediate priority during the pandemic. And so whether it was increasing the laboratory testing or genomic surveillance of the COVID through their diagnostic divisions, or sourcing rapid scale or rapid construction of new ventilators, I think that their level of integration really allowed them to spread their procurement and their adoption across the entire province, which also made an attractive environment to our local innovators that were able to provide those solutions to the province and to the healthcare authority here. So I think it really sort of validated the value of having that level of integration across the system, and also put a lot of pressure on the system and how quickly they can do that adoption and procurement process, which, as it turns out, they can do it actually quite quickly. And so we're all hoping that they sustain that level of speed to some degree, maybe not at 300%, but maybe they can sustain it at 150 to 200%. The normal speed going forward. So I think those are probably the two biggest takeaways in terms of the technology kind of adoption process that we've seen impacted from the pandemic.
Emily, I'm conscious we're coming in towards the end, so maybe I know you've got a comment on this. Then maybe I can always as well start with you asking that final question of, we're coming towards midsummer and summer solstice, and there'll be lots of wishes put out there from various quarters. What would be your greatest wish from midsummer that would help the academic industry interface? But over to your comment first.
Thanks, Tony. Yes, I think a previous comment I wanted to make was just on the clinical investigators that that we are definitely working with here, and just to make the point on what Niall says on integration. I think that's really important to have such integration, and working with clinical investigators really help to make this bridge into this translational science, because we are they're working with patients every day, and they are able to really see the unmet need and then come up with a solution for patients. So I think, again, not a wish that I have, because I think it will continue like that, but working with these clinical investigators brings up into this translational work that we can then move forward with an industry partner. If I had one wish on the wish lists that I can share with my peers, and I think we've talked about a bit about that in this hour, but even in a vibrant ecosystem, I think that access to early funding is really key. We are again seeing lots of funding from VCs, and I think COVID has not really altered any of that funding in the ecosystem. But really, the access to the early funding that can then raise the interest to the industry is something that we are still struggling with. We are really trying to be creative with our investigators, and when they come to us and they are asking for just this little push that they need to make a prototype when they are working on a device, and they have this super idea that they want to develop, but they don't have the funding to do so. And when you're talking about more a new therapeutics, a new molecule, I think you need a bit more than just the funding for a prototype. And that's really where we are still lacking, and trying to have, again, some solutions internally that we can suggest. And we have some new funds that will launch after the pandemic, and it was planned for last year. But the idea is just to kickstart these innovations and to make sure that they can be visible for industries.
Right. What would be top of your wish list?
Yes.
I think it's related to this, but interestingly, we talked about a little bit of how slow it can be moving technology through technology transfer and those sorts of things. But in reality, that occurs almost throughout this entire process. It's interesting with Emily and Niall, where they were talking about integrated healthcare systems. We face this once you get to clinical development, trying to get through universities or academic medical centers and get protocols approved, get a trial kicked off, and those huge delays that happen in that stage. And Iris and others were talking about the benefit of the US healthcare system. US healthcare system is incredibly disaggregated. It's just much bigger and the payment rates are much higher. So we run into that same problem on the payment side, where it's a payer by payer battle. So I think for all of us, it's how do we, and maybe you talked about this earlier, has the pandemic caused some innovations or people's willingness to take or accept risk a little bit more? There's a lot of opportunities to, maybe it's fail faster so you can succeed faster.
Good philosophy. Iris, what would you wish for?
So if I can wish, I think that it is time for the regulators and the investors and the industry and the clinical people to start talking to the academia. We don't need to wait until there is a company, until there is a startup register to start getting those conversations. The academia needs to understand funding, need to understand the market before, if they want to have something applied science, they need to understand it before they start filing IP for things that after 15 years nobody wants to buy, to say an example. So we should bring the conversation earlier to the academia and not wait until there is a company. I think so.
Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, these are all very good comments that I have to agree with. I think the the early stage financing, rather than, no matter if it's a project or if it's a startup, is really where it's challenging. It's what I call pre-seed. So, where do you get that $100,000 to do the killer experiment and move on with, be a success, or say, this is not going to work, go back to the bench. And this is where I think it's maybe the government needs to be involved in there as well, because there's it's so risky at this point that there needs to be some kind of leverage to really be able to move forward. And then I think it's the wish is always that we can bring more innovation to the market. And I'm going back to the earlier comment. I mean, Iris mentioned that we have to bring VCs earlier, and I think that we need to make sure that our scientists listen to what is needed and are willing to adapt, so that we all work together in the same direction.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, luckily, all the other panelists have already wished for, better funding opportunities. So I'm going to touch upon another wish that I hope will come true in the future. As a cluster perspective, I think one very good thing would be a lot of transparency. So we try to connect, people within the ecosystem as much as possible, but obviously in an ideal world, all capabilities, all capacities of doing stuff would be visible and known by everybody. So you could, build bridges much faster. So if there would be a mechanism that, these connections can get made faster, that would be ideal.
No.
Yeah, great comments so far. I agree with every one of them, and maybe with something on my wish list that I hope is sustained, that we've seen build up over the pandemic, is kind of connections to other clusters and other ecosystems. And I'm particularly thinking of some of the challenges an emerging ecosystem runs into in terms of the financing that's sort of available for those companies. But what we've seen over the pandemic is our companies have had great success in securing financing through other jurisdictions, where in the past those investors may not have looked outside of their own bubble and their own ecosystem. But I think out of necessity, I think we saw some of those bridges get made, and some of those investors look elsewhere. And so my wish is for that to continue in a bit more of a fluid capital environment.
Excellent. And finishing off with the UK, Gino.
Well, a bit old school, really. I'd love to. My one wish is that after this, we could all meet in the bar and have a drink. But clearly, some of the best ideas have been done in the bar or over a coffee. And I think, what I mean by that is the physical interaction of meeting people, I think, is going to be key. And I think don't get me wrong, Zoom and virtual has been fantastic in many, many ways, but I don't want it to be the 100% replacement for meeting somebody at a conference. I think Emma, you mentioned that, because some of the best ideas come from speaking to your peers, reading a poster, seeing an abstract being presented, or the conversation in the bar afterwards, and then the dendrons get fired up and the ideas start to be created. And I think I want that hybrid of the old days and the new days, and that'd be my one wish. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the innovation is a contact sport. I think it's the way it goes. Well, we're up to time, but thank you all for sharing the insights about the ecosystems where you are, what maybe works, what doesn't work so well yet and could be better. I guess if I had one wish sitting here in the UK, it would be making Dame Kate Bingham, who led our vaccine task force, get her into Parliament and make her the science minister to maintain that risk appetite amongst investing from government to scale it. That would be my wish. But thank you all very much. I'm sure people watching this will get a great sense of there's much more to dig into, and we could have spent all day talking about some of these things, I'm sure, and hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up over that beer and dig a bit deeper. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wish you well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. It was a pleasure.